So the Associated Press is reporting on a horrific story coming out of the Middle East, Yemen in particular, as Yemen faces their horrific civil war, which, by the way, has sides that are militias that are backed by Iran on one side, and then you got militias backed by Saudi Arabia on the other side, and they're fighting a country, or they're fighting each other in the country. Yemen has been devastated. I mean, there's no way around that. And, I mean, what we've seen is just a humanitarian disaster that unfortunately doesn't get reported. Now, to add on to this humanitarian disaster is a story about African migrants that are coming to Yemen. Now, they're facing their own crisis. And let me get into that. According to the AP, African migrants coming to Yemen have described to reporters horrific abuses, including rape and sexual assault of both women and boys at the hands of local security forces. Now, these local security forces happen to be backed by the UAE. That is the United Arab Emirates, according to an international rights group. Now, they said that migrants from the Horn of Africa continue to travel to Yemen en route to jobs in the oil-rich Gulf, despite the 3-year civil war between the Saudi-led coalition and Iranian-linked Houthi rebels. Now, look, imagine how bad it has to be for you to want to travel to or through Yemen to get to someplace safe. You're traveling through a literal battlefield. And there have been other terrible stories of smugglers, human traffickers, basically, smuggling people from Africa, so from sub-Saharan Africa to Yemen, throwing people off their boats in the middle of the ocean. There's also been boats that have capsized and people that have drowned. So, I mean, everything that's going on there, again, is a humanitarian disaster. And unfortunately, nobody seems to cover it. This doesn't get on cable news. They're talking about Stormy Daniels in Russia 24/7. And this kind of just absolute disaster gets left out. There's no room. And nobody reports on what's going on in Africa. And of course, you know, Africa, as a result of a lot of what's going on, is Western exploitation, unfortunately. So, and Western intervention, which is what's going on in Yemen right now. Look, let me give you an example of what's going on. I mean, just the humanitarian disaster that the Yemeni people are facing. Over 30 kids a day die from hunger. There's a famine that is sweeping the affected area, right, in Yemen. Not only that, but they've been suffering from the largest cholera outbreak in recorded history that has killed about over 2,000 people since October of 2016. So imagine how bad your home has to be in Africa, or how little opportunity there is in Africa to want to go to this country where you have a disastrous civil war, a sweeping famine, and an enormous cholera outbreak to deal with. And then imagine then getting to Yemen and having this happen. According to Human Rights Watch, security forces linked to the UAE, which is a leading member of the coalition, they're actually allied with Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia is allied with the United States. They have systematically abused women and children before then forcing them to return to their countries of origin and preventing access to aid agencies. Man. Now, the group based its report on interviews with 8 different migrants. So they interviewed some people. I know that's a rather small size, but I think you can get an accurate picture from these personal interviews. Now, these are mostly Ethiopian who were held at migrant detention centers in a den run by the UAE-backed security forces. Now, listen to this account. This is what was told to Human Rights Watch. Quote, every night they would take one to rape them, one detainee said. Not all of them, the small ones, adding that he knew 7 boys who had been sexually assaulted. Jesus. Now, this conflict, by the way, we're a part of. We give money and weapons to Saudi Arabia to allow them to do this. That's our bombs that are being dropped on Yemen right now. So there is a lack of oversight. There is a lack of basically law and order. And again, it's a battlefield. And so when you have that situation, there's no one that can protect these people, these migrants. Now, look, there's some people that are probably say, well, they chose to go. They chose to put themselves in that situation. Step back and have some empathy for a minute here. These are fellow human beings that you're saying, oh, well, they deserved it. I mean, if they showed up there, they deserve what they got. What kind of a monster do you have to be to believe that? I mean, it's horrific. Horrific. Now, this turmoil that we are a part of has helped create a situation where migrants are vulnerable to this kind of abuse and cruelty at the hands of armed trafficking rings. And so, look, the reason that I wanted to bring this up is not just because of the suffering that's going on there, which is immense, and what's happening to the Yemeni people, but I also want to bring this up in the context of war and funding endless war. And that's unfortunately what we're doing, right? When you fund and you conduct endless wars in this area, and you back certain people versus certain other people, and you get them to fight each other, or you allow them to, you arm them so that they can fight each other and bomb each other's cities and things like that. You open up these situations. You create these situations. Now imagine if instead of arming them and helping to bomb them, we actually help those people through humanitarian aid. Imagine if we also, instead of bombing them, didn't exploit their natural resources like we do in Africa, like we do in the Middle East. I mean, we got corporations that love exploiting these countries in Africa and the Middle East and their people. And of course, while they're exploiting the hell out of these countries for natural resources, they end up creating absolute misery for the people that are living there. I mean, there's still literally child labor in South Africa. And all of that is to feed our, I guess, addiction to technology devices. Yes, I own one. And for, diamonds and for precious materials that are in these countries that we are exploiting. Our corporations, the West, is exploiting. We don't have these conversations. We're not having these conversations at any time. And what do? Well, for one, we got to actually talk about this. And then, aside from starting a conversation on this, which hasn't even happened yet, and should, especially in mainstream media, aside from doing that, we need to change our policies. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more like this, please hit the subscribe button below. And if you want to support truly independent progressive media, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/TYTNation.